Hi there, Dave Markham for Markham Slow News, where we look at the backstory for today's news that you may have missed or forgotten about. Context is important in understanding current events, and today we are remembering how messed up uh, the United States is because it decided to treat the internet as a private company rather than as a public utility. And millions of students still can't get online. Olga Kazan has a great article in The Atlantic on August 17th, 2020, where she talks to various school officials and in speaking to a teacher outside of Fresno, California, Rachel Cooper, who teaches eighth grade, estimated that 20% of her eighth grade students didn't have internet at home, and 20% have spotty internet. It's rough, she says. Some kids are using their phones to log into class, but the screens are too small to work on, and some kids' internet cuts out in the middle of class, and others don't bother to log in at all. How did such an advanced country as the United States leave so many people technologically behind? Experts and formal Communication Commission officials describe the federal government that has neglected to treat broadband as a public utility instead of relying on the largely self-regulated internet industry to provide service wherever it wanted for the price of its choosing. The United States government has historically not seen fast internet as something everyone should have, like it does water, electricity, phone service, and the consequences now in the time of pandemic are frighteningly apparent. The Federal Communications Commission has failed to figure out where exactly the unconnected live because the maps of broadband access the agency relies on are generated by internet providers and are extremely inaccurate. According to the Pew Research Center, about 15% of all households with school-aged children lack a high-speed internet connection. Some of these families live in areas that broadband providers don't service, but others simply can't afford the broadband that runs right outside of their doorstep. I know in my house, I pay $49 a month for my internet connection. And a lot of poor families, that would feed them for a week. So some people note that the majority of people who don't have internet actually live in cities and suburbs, not in rural areas. They just can't afford it. So even in normal times, this digital divide holds back the unconnected in innumerable ways. Broadband access tends to boost local economies because many companies run on the internet and employers tend to take job applications only online. Many areas that lack internet also lack doctors, but telemedicine can't reach places where people have a connection strong enough for FaceTime. People without internet might have trouble accessing news and information. And in areas where broadband exists, but not everyone can afford it, teachers still assign homework online and only some students can complete it. Sharon Strover, a communications professor at the University of Texas at Austin, said, quote, "Many people are actually aware of their inability to quickly whip out a phone that can connect the internet without thinking about how much it's going to cost," end quote. Typically, internet companies say they aren't have enough customers in certain areas for them to feel financially incentivized to go there. And so this leads to what's been called the digital redlining, in which the wealthy people get internet and lower income people don't. Similar to residential redlining, this is has a disparate racial impact, with Black Americans less likely than white Americans to have a broadband connection at home. Meanwhile, because of lobbying by the communications industry and the internet providers, 24 states have made it illegal or even difficult for cities to build out their own internet network, in a large part because of the lobbying by the internet companies. And then they even then fail to do the job. For instance, CenturyLink received $505 million a year for 6 years from the Federal Communications Commission to expand rural broadband. The company didn't do it, though, and yet it's not been sanctioned by the FCC and is still eligible for a new round of federal funding this October. I know here in New York State, Spectrum just was fined, big fines by the state for failing to meet their targets of expanding their broadband as they had promised. Under the Trump administration, things have even gotten worse. The Trump administration has wanted to deregulate and privatize so many things that are really in the public interest. And it's misguided. It goes back to the time of Reagan, where government was not the solution, government was the problem. Well, the government does pretty darn well delivering a lot of things like water, garbage collection, electricity, roads, fire departments, police, and so on. So the idea that government doesn't serve the common good, particularly when it comes to allocating resources in the commons in an equitable and just way, is just nonsense. In 2019, a quarter of adults earning less than $30,000 annually relied on their smartphones alone for internet access, which was up from 12% in 2013. And many people are forced to fill out job applications, school forms, and other paperwork on a 5-inch screen. Oh, God. I've had to do that myself, trying to use my smartphone. Luckily, I do have an internet with an internet connection, and so I can use my laptop to do more complicated clerical tasks on the internet rather than relying on a smartphone. And so in the COVID-19 era, all these failures come crashing down on teachers who now rely on the internet to do their jobs. And some teachers are very resentful, saying that their students just can't get the material, and even if they do, they don't have the equipment to be able to process it and fill it in and complete it and send it back and all that. And one teacher says, it feels like a lot of times right now, it's my job as a teacher to find a way for students to connect to the internet. And I don't think that's my job. Policymakers should have made it possible for students to connect. So here is a society in the United States where we say that we value education for our young people. And President Trump says he wants all the kids to go back to school because they need an education. Yet many of the schools aren't going to be able to open because of contagion hotspots, and or they're using a hybrid model, and yet the internet infrastructure isn't available to students because of the misguided public policies about building out our internet infrastructure. The FCC has become very corrupt, ending net neutrality, pandering to the internet and communications corporations. which really do not serve the American public well. And here we have a specific example where educational services are hampered and can't be made available because the United States, the richest country on the planet, does not have the internet infrastructure to be able to accommodate its young people so that their educational services can be effectively and efficiently provided. This is not a big issue as we go into the 2020 election season, as we choose our presidential candidate to vote for, and our senatorial candidates, and our House of Representative candidates, and our local state officials, and county and town officials. But if you're affected by this, by access to the internet, and who isn't these days, bring it up with your elected officials and see where they stand on turning the access and broadband infrastructure into a public utility that's regulated and governed, just like we do our electricity, our gas, our water, and so forth. All right, that's it for this edition of Markham Slow News. Thanks for visiting. Leave a comment. Until next time, be well, stay well. Bye.